Video games aren't just about fun. They're the result of decisions, mistakes, and sometimes pure carelessness that can shape the fate of a whole project. Out of the thousands of games that have been made, some didn't just fail. They became symbols of poor design and total incompetence. But hidden in those failures are truths that are sometimes even weirder or funnier than the games themselves. In this video, we are digging into the weirdest and funniest facts behind these unforgettable disasters. Facts most people have probably never even heard of. Let's kick things off with one of the worst games ever made, Big Rigs. A lot of you and other gamers probably already know this one. Over the years, tons of videos have been made about it, and honestly, it might be the most limitless game of all time, because it straight up doesn't care about limits. You can drive off the map, go in reverse across the entire level at ridiculous speeds, whatever you want. But maybe the funniest part? You always win.
I win.
In the original version, your opponent literally doesn't move. You just cross the finish line and you win. Later, they released the patch that finally made the opponent move. But if your opponent crossed the finish line before you, you'd still win. Yeah, that's how broken it is. Now, you might be wondering, who even made this thing? It was developed by a studio called Stellar Stone. On paper, they were based in the US, but in reality, they were just an empty name. The actual games were developed in Eastern Europe, mainly Ukraine and Russia. Their whole goal was to make super low budget games, and honestly, one look at Big Rigs and that's pretty obvious. What's wild is they didn't even bother checking if the game worked. They just released without any real testing or feedback from the Ukrainian team actually building it. That probably explains why it turned out the way it did. A fan was once working on an unofficial patch to fix the game and fix tons of bugs. It was going well, but sadly, the developer fell into depression and the patch was never finished or released. And on April 8th this year, Big Rigs was re-released on Steam by a company called Margaret Entertainment. The announcement trailer, it actually shows how bad the game is.
And if that's not enough, you'll also be able to race your modified rig on one of 5 different tracks for the ultimate driving rush as you crush the competition and set a new track record. Features include 4 big rig trucks with trailers, 4 unique routes, desert, forest, plains, and cities. Day and night driving, a real challenge for even the most experienced truckers. 3 intense levels with a variety of wicked challenges. Never lose, 'cause you're a winner.
You've probably heard of Right to Hell, the game that came out in 2013, the same year that huge titles like The Last of Us and GTA 5 were released. Right to Hell didn't just flop, it ended up on lists of the worst games ever made. What most people don't know is that this game originally had some big ideas behind it. At first, Right to Hell was meant to be an open world game kinda like GTA, set in 1960s America. It was supposed to feature large environments, a dynamic weather system, full bike and clothing customization, street brawls, and all kinds of period-specific elements. But due to budget cuts and bad management, all of that got scrapped. Development started back in 2008, and over the next 5 years, the project was rebooted multiple times and basically fell into development hell. When it finally released in 2013, it was completely unfinished. Critics gave it very low scores right away, and it sold so poorly that stores actually pulled it from shelves. What's interesting is that the original plan was to make it the first in a trilogy, with 2 more games, Right to Hell Road 666 and Right to Hell Beatdown, in development. But the failure of the first game was so bad they cancelled everything. You can't really call Rogue Warrior the worst game ever made, but yeah, it was definitely a weak one. The game was originally being developed by Zombie Studios, and it was supposed to be a tactical team-based shooter with a focus on stealth. The missions were meant to be realistic military operations set in North Korea, and the gameplay involved a 4-person squad that needed coordination and a strategy to get through. But Bethesda wasn't happy with how development was going, so they handed the project over to Rebellion. That's when everything changed. Rebellion scrapped most of the original concept and turned it into a linear, single-player shooter. The focus on realism was thrown out, and the tone of the game was shifted. Somehow it became almost comedic. One of the wildest parts? The main character, Richard's demo deck Markinko, drops around 200 F-bombs in just the first couple of hours.
Fucking asshole, you little bitch, you suck-ass pig. Shit, fuck piss, goddamn shit, goddamn Jesus fucking Christ, Jesus goddamn Christ, body, motherfucker. Fuck your mother, fuck your father, fuck him in the ass, you cocksucker, you fucking asshole.
Most of them were actually improvised by the voice actor, Mikey Rourke. So yeah, Rogue Warriors is a mess. But those over-the-top and weirdly aggressive voice lines might at least make you laugh for a minute.
Happy fucking birthday, asshole.
I think Limbo of the Lost doesn't get talked about enough, even though it's honestly worse than most bad games out there. Development on this game actually started way back in the early 90s. It was originally planned for the Amiga, but for all sorts of reasons, the project kept running into trouble. It finally came out on PC in 2007, and it was a complete mess.
Pointing and clicking has never been this much fun. Oh, be careful! There's something behind you! What? I don't know what's going on. He doesn't either.
It had major technical issues, visual bugs, awful voice acting, stiff gameplay, and a weak story. But the only reason most people have even heard of this game is because of a bizarre scandal surrounding it. In June 2008, a gamer named Game Plasma was playing the game and noticed that one of the halls looked oddly familiar. It was almost identical to a room in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion that got him curious. So he did some side-by-side comparisons and realized that Limbo of the Lost had literally used a screenshot from Oblivion and copied it straight into the game. He shared his findings on a few forums and other players quickly jumped in. Turns out Limbo of the Lost had ripped assets from at least 15 different games. Even crazier, it also used images from a couple of movies and even a freaking music video. The situation blew up and several gaming sites at the time covered the story. Eventually, the publisher pulled the game from the shelves to avoid any lawsuits. What's wild is that none of the devs from the games that got ripped off ever really bothered to take action. And honestly, that kinda makes sense. Limbo of the Lost didn't sell well, and no one really cared enough to go after it. Aliens Colonial Marines is definitely one of the most disappointing games in history. The first time we saw it at E3 2011, it promised a cinematic shooter with great graphics and advanced enemy AI. When the game launched, it had a lot of problems, and one of the biggest was the enemy AI. The aliens would get stuck in walls or run at weird angles instead of attacking properly. It completely broke the immersion. But here's the wild part. The reason for all that was just a typo, seriously. A few years after the game came out, a modder was digging through the game files and noticed a funny little typo. In one of the config files, the devs have written tether instead of tether. That one small typo stopped the whole AI system from working. The tether system was supposed to keep the enemies locked on the player, so they'd know where the player was and how to move and attack. But because the code was misspelled, that whole mechanic never activated, so the aliens would just wander around or freeze, not knowing what to do. After the modder fixed the typo and let other players know, the enemy AI actually improved a lot. It didn't fix everything, but the game started to work kinda like it was supposed to. And yeah, that wasn't even the end of the drama. Sega and Gearbox got into legal trouble for showing that fake trailer. That's a whole other story on its own. Zelda The Wand of Gamelon is often called one of the worst games ever made, and probably the worst game ever released under Nintendo's name. Funny enough, Nintendo wasn't really involved in making it. They just signed a deal with Philips to let them use the Zelda license, and the game was made by an studio called Animation Magic. Honestly, judging by the cutscenes, they probably should have picked a different name. The cutscenes alone show how bad the game is. They look like they were made by a bunch of amateurs. The gameplay was super slow and clunky, and the mechanics were just plain bad. Playing it was more frustrating than fun. Even after 32 years, players still remember those weird, awkward cutscenes. And while Nintendo didn't actually develop the game, Zelda The Wand of Gamelon will forever be part of their history as the worst Zelda game ever released. Shigeru Miyamoto, the father of Nintendo, even mentioned this game indirectly in an interview. He said he's no longer interested in signing deals with other companies to let them make games based on Nintendo IPs. Looking at the worst games in history isn't just for laughs. It's a window into mistakes, rushed decisions, and sometimes big ambitions that just weren't handled right. Each of these games has a story behind it, from studios struggling with tight budgets to managers who promised way too much and delivered way less. But these failed games actually helped the industry. They showed us that success isn't just about having a big idea, it's about execution, attention to detail, respecting the players and timing too. These might be some of the worst games ever, but let's not forget every big failure comes with an important lesson. There are thousands of stories like these still out there, stories about games so bad they became legendary. Trust me, this video is just the first part.